colored pencil is one of the very first mediums that I fell in love with as a full-time artist. And lately I've been revisiting my love for them as I explore some color. So in this video, I want to share my top 10 tips for colored pencil sketches and show my portrait sketch process as I try some new fun color combos. The very first thing that I always like to do is to prepare my sanctuary. Take a moment to prepare your pencils, your creative space. I now keep my pencils in these glass containers, and they actually sit on the left of my desk now. I used to keep them in these portfolio cases, but I learned that I'd never use them. So now to get my workflow in, I always begin by laying everything out because odds are if they're not laid out, I will not grab them. Here are some sketches and studies that I began, and before we begin the next one together, let's talk about tip number 1. Before going in with color, map out a clean graphite sketch. For this, you mainly want to focus on lines. Instead of rendering everything with graphite, we want to focus on a light sketch with line so that we can leave the rendering and shading up to the colored pencils. Here's another example of a sketch versus the colored pencil rendering. For this specific medium, we want to keep the sketch super light, and this way the colored pencils will show up as bright as possible when you begin drawing on top. I like to keep my initial graphite drawing mapping out really nice geometric shapes that I see in the shadows. And remember, you can always lift up any extra graphite with a kneaded eraser, just in case you press too hard. Okay, so let's keep filling up this page. I think I'm gonna put the next sketch down here. When doing color pencil portraits, I like to start off with a mechanical pencil because it just gives me a little bit more precision. And tip number 2 is a bit obvious, but super important. Paper matters. With colored pencil, you want a paper that has a little bit of tooth but not too much, and they should feel good and sort of glide on the paper, yet create a bit of texture so you can see the beautiful layers show up. When I first started colored pencil drawings, I always used Bristol paper. I personally loved how smooth it was. It's really smooth paper. However, I've been really liking a slight tooth lately, meaning a tiny bit of texture. But I suggest to think about what paper you enjoy working on, try out different options, and pay close attention on how the pencil shows up and lays down on the paper. With these studies, I really wanted to explore new color palettes and try something new, and I already start thinking about this during the sketch phase. I get inspired by color from all sorts of places, but this book never fails me. I think we may stick to a pink and blue color palette. The third tip that I found extremely crucial is the way you sharpen your pencil. Depending on the brand, I found that certain colored pencils can break the way you sharpen them. Here's a sharpener that I've been really liking for colored pencils specifically. And I actually find that using the second hole, the larger one, actually doesn't break the pencil as I'm drawing. I've also found that the softer the colored pencil, the more it's likely to break, and the harder the pencil, the longer it can stay sharpened. Again, this really comes down to the brands and the consistency of the colored pencil they have inside. A tip to prevent the lead from breaking: avoid dropping your pencils as it could shatter the lead inside. I lift up some of the graphite and then I make sure the proportions are correct and all the features are in parallel. And as we begin with a color, tip number 4 is to begin with a base layer. Pick a color. I picked pink in this case. You're gonna lay in your base tone, similar how you would tone your canvas and get rid of the white of the paper. I like to do this very lightly, and then I pick a color close to the base tone, one shade darker, and that's what I do to shade in the darker shadows. Whether you're drawing from a model or you're drawing from references, pick photos that have a clear highlight and shadow. This will bring more dimension to your drawings, and it will allow you to assign colors for the shadows and the highlights, which is our tip number 5. Now, what do I mean by assigning colors to highlights and shadows? In this portrait, I assign the warm colors to be the highlights and the cool colors to be the shadows. So the oranges, peach colors, and pinks are the warm colors for the highlights on the right of the face, and then we have our cooler colors for the shadows on the left. I actually have a full 1-hour demo for this portrait specifically up on my Patreon, so if you're interested in a slowed down, in-depth process of me talking about this and creating it together, check it out along with a library of collection of real-time videos on there as well. As you're creating your colored pencil sketches, remember that once you introduce one color in your sketch and in your study, you want to introduce it throughout the whole sketch. There's a delicate balance per se. Now, speaking of balance, for tip number 6, pay attention to the way that you hold your pencil. Depending on where you hold the pencil, whether it's closer to the edge or not, whether it's angled a bit, or if you're holding it straight above on a parallel, pay attention to the kind of line that it makes. The more you angle a pencil and the lighter you press on it, the softer, more textured line you'll have. As you sharpen your pencil and angle it more straight, the thinner and more precise line you'll get. This also includes the pressure that you apply on the pencil. You want to keep it consistent throughout shading your whole area, and I think this really develops throughout muscle memory. Some excellent exercises to practice this is a value scale where you shade from light to dark. I'll link a video where I demonstrate this for ways to practice here on YouTube. But I definitely think this tip plays a huge role, especially when it comes to the amount of pressure and line quality you apply for each color. Before I share the next tip as I continue to develop the sketch, a quick thanks and shout out to our sponsors, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to create your website. Everything from growing your business, e-commerce to portfolios. As a full-time artist, I was able to set up everything on my own. I am able to manage it up all on my own. I can successfully run my shop as well as upload some portfolio and sketchbook pages. This is definitely thanks to their award-winning templates and super user-friendly profile. And I can't stress this enough, I love how the templates are very mobile-friendly as everyone kind of shops and goes on their phones nowadays. And I truly believe that having a website in general so people can find you is super important. So give it a try by going to squarespace.com, and when you're ready to launch, head over to squarespace.com/JessCarp for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. When I choose one color for the actual portrait, for example, the main base color here is blue, I like to use an analogous color or a complementary color for the background. And I love watching all the different colors mixed together. Now, the reason this happens so beautifully is because of tip number 7, which is to create layers, layers, layers. This medium itself is a layering medium. It does beautifully when you layer different colors on top of one another with a very light pressure. And the beauty about it is it can also blend beautifully if you press a little harder. However, I've learned that in the very beginning stages, it's really beautiful to take your time, be patient, and create as many layers as possible. So as I'm in my process of drawing, I'm telling myself more layers, less detail. And this really allows me to build up depth, substance, and gorgeous values and color combos. Now, I also want to note that color pencil takes time and requires lots of patience. Much of the footage is sped up. However, I really love to get in this meditation process with myself when I'm doing color pencils. That's just me personally, but I did want to mention that because depending on the technique that you take, especially when it comes to layering and having a very light pressure on the pencil at first, it's great to take your time and just be patient with the process. The next tip may be something that you don't hear often. However, I find it really important to feel our colors as artists. Colored pencils are amazing for developing a bunch of different variations. Literally, the possibilities are endless. So hone into what you feel and the colors that you feel in the moment. You can plan an overall color palette, but also allow things to come in the moment. I definitely didn't plan on adding these turquoise colors and greens into her hair, but in this specific moment, I wanted to add a bit more color and create a connecting variation together. If you watch the channel long enough, you know that I love to say that everything is connected, and I like to connect all my sketches together on my page. Also, if you're new here, you should definitely subscribe to the channel so you don't miss on any other videos. And if you've been here for a while, thanks so much for coming back. For tip number 9 is one of my holy grails for color pencil. I've discovered that the best way to lay in a beautiful, consistent layer is using this tiny circular motion with the pencil. I like to alternate with straight lines sometimes and also this little circular rounded motion. The combination of these two I find are like chef's kiss when it comes to creating movement, texture, and soft values throughout your drawing. Keeping a consistent pressure and moving the pencil in these directions. Basically, I like to lock my wrist and draw from my wrist rather than my shoulder, which you may have seen me mention in other videos. This way I'm really keeping that consistency, and if I'm really into my sketch, you'll catch me with 2 pencils in my hand. But yeah, this comes with hours of practice and getting that into your muscle memory. For tip number 10, I want to mention something that you can do in case you find something doesn't look the way you want it or you think you have a mistake. There are no mistakes, but quote unquote, if you want to fix something, I like to go in with a creamy white pencil. You can press relatively hard and it'll allow you to really blend in the areas, which will create this sort of thick layer of colored pencil, which you can then layer on top of. This is great for skin tones, and I usually like to do this whenever I want to create that final layer of blending. Two of my favorite white pencils that I found to work excellently are Prismacolor and Holbein. Whether I'm creating sketches or finished pieces, I always like to look at the page as a whole. I was really loving all these fun colors moving around, and to create even more movement, I added a bunch of different colors and diagonal motions to keep the eye moving throughout the paper. And check it out, here is how the final page turned out. Alright guys, here's the finished result. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'll have some videos linked up on the screen if you want to keep practicing. I also recently uploaded an art resources video. It's definitely helpful for all artists of all levels, so definitely check that out. I'm sending you love and light wherever you are. Stay creative, and I'll see you soon. Bye!